evening and welcome to Zero Time. I'm your host, Maria Zeee. Australia has seen some of the biggest shifts in society more than ever over the past 3 years. Throughout the so-called COVID pandemic era within Australia, we've witnessed things like lockdowns, forced injections, draconian laws put in place, travel restrictions, mask mandates, both indoor and outdoor. Don't visit your neighbour. Don't trust the person next to you. Don't trust your family. Which has caused a huge divide and distrust within society. So many things were imposed that people weren't allowed to question. How did governments get away with this? During these trying times for society as a whole, no other part or system of society has seen a change as much as Australia's police force. Over the past 3 years, we have seen Australian police doing the most unthinkable things to their own people. People were thrown to the ground, tackled, choked for not wearing a mask. Police beat people on the street beyond heavy-handedness against the violators of lockdowns and so much more. These are horrendous acts that we never imagined we would witness from those who are there to serve and protect, harming their own people in the name of "for your health." And how could we forget the moment when Victorian police shot at peaceful protesters with rubber bullets? One of the most violent, traumatic things ever experienced by the people of this country at the hands of law enforcement. Take a look at this.
Gotta go around the back, guys. They're shooting towards the shrine of the protesters. Fire out. They're still firing, guys. Getting a bit of cover here.
Oh, Australia, what have you become? Government involvement into Australians' lives was so intrusive, and their ability to enforce their intrusion on our lives was enabled through a weaponised police force. In days gone by, the police were our public servants, held in high esteem and revered by the public, charged with an oath to protect and to serve. This has been the case for generations, as historically the police were seen as upstanding, respected members of the community and someone that you would call without hesitation in a time of need. It seems that as successful as the government has been at dividing various areas of society, they have also been just as successful in driving a wedge between the sacred relationship between the public and law enforcement. This effort by the government to divide society and weaponise the police force against the people has been so destructive that we are now witnessing the lowest uptake numbers ever seen, with recruitment of new officers in the state of Queensland so low that we are now importing 2,500 foreign officers to police the state. It seems that Australian people are not drawn to this once highly revered career path anymore. Perhaps more alarming is a now rising trend emerging more so in the state of Queensland of police further escalating their behaviour towards the people, with 3 separate events that took place in the past week alone, which we will discuss in this broadcast, that have raised more questions than answers yet again. One of the more recent incidents resulted in the death of a man named Stephen Harrison, a historian, a man that stood for freedom, was a lover of the Constitution and a lover of his country and the people in it. In the coming interview, you will hear many questionable tactics used by police in the hours leading up to Stephen's tragic death. Brett Tunbridge, a close friend of Stephen's who was on the phone with him throughout the night, joins us after this short break to tell his story. We'll be right back. The New World Order has openly declared war on the free people of the world, and now they're telling us to expect catastrophic cyber attacks over the next 2 years. Weather events, no power, grids down, mobile cell services out. Contact your loved ones anywhere, anytime with the satellite phone store. The Bivvy is a revolutionary GPS-based device which allows you to send SMS messages via your phone even if you have no mobile or cell service. Galileo will ensure you always stay in contact with Zeee Media, other trusted information sources, and your loved ones that can update you in real time in the event of an emergency. Don't be caught out and unprepared for the unprecedented times we are living in. Stay 10 steps ahead through secure, encrypted communication. Visit sat123.com/Maria and prepare yourself and your loved ones now. We're joined now by Brett Tunbridge, a good friend of Stephen Harrison. Brett, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Maria.
We appreciate you coming on in this difficult time. I'm sure that for you, your family, and all of the people of your town, it is a very, very difficult time. I really want to understand your version of events from that tragic night. But before we get into that, could you please just describe the nature of your relationship with Stephen Harrison?
Okay, Stephen Harrison was a very, very close friend of mine. I met him some years ago. He would have to be described as a slightly unusual individual, probably more than slightly. He was a historian. I met him literally down the street, and I introduced myself because he seemed an interesting character, and he informed me that he was a historian, and that was his stock in trade, and we became friends, close friends. And with probably the last 3 years, with the situations obviously that everyone's aware of with mandates and things, we became closer friends, and I regarded him as a personal confidant, and he regarded me as the same. My understanding, he literally tell me what he thought, so I trust that.
When you say strange man or peculiar man, what do you mean by that? I mean, we've got a short clip that we want to play as a tribute to Stephen at the end of this interview, which we will do. But what exactly do you mean by that?
I would describe him as a man out of his time. Because he was a historian, he took up history in its fullness. His clothing, his attire was very of a time gone by. His manner of speech was more of an Australian speech from probably 80 years ago. So he wasn't one of those "how you going, bud" kind of guys. He was more of "greetings, old boy." So it was unusual, and I always found it to be refreshing that someone could actually not only study history but live it in its fullness. It was he believed in a time gone by that was seemingly gone for the rest of us, and he kept that alive by the way he was.
You mentioned to me that that he would, even spend time with your children. I read another account of a neighbour that says that, he would regularly go to their house for dinner and spend time with her children. So he was definitely, from what I understand, a gentleman, certainly someone that people trusted with their kids.
I would have trusted him with my life. I have no problem. He was absolutely loved by children because of his unusual way of attire. They used to call him, what was it? There's a fellow out of one of the films. Captain Jack or whatever Jack Sparrow.
Jack
That's what they call
Sparrow.
him. The kids used to think because of his unusual attire, and he wore that not to try and big note himself. He just regarded that was a decent way to dress. So, if you look at the video at the end, you'll meet the man and you'll get an understanding of the kind of person he was. His level of intelligence, I would have estimated so far above mine that it makes me look like a first grader.
Well,
he had an eidetic memory. Now, eidetic memory means total recall. So everything he ever came across or read or conversation he heard, he could literally relay it.
And my understanding, he was also a constitutional expert.
He was a constitutional historian. His house, he had thousands upon thousands of books on law, constitution, he was a monarchist, so he believed in the monarchy, he believed in the rule of law, believed in the crown. He was a devout Christian. He also had large numbers of texts from time gone by, religious texts, stuff like that. So, I mean, it doesn't make a man an extremist, as has been alleged by some people, to study history. It doesn't make you. I'm searching for words here, but I'm not sure Stephen would have had them. But it doesn't make you out of the ordinary to want to know the answers in life, and he did. He researched the answers.
Well, it certainly doesn't make you out of the ordinary, but it is it is rhetoric that we're hearing time and time again out of the mainstream media, outlets and outlets that post articles online that are considered mainstream. Anyone who dares ask questions is a conspiracy theorist. We saw that just recently in regards to some of the practices of the New South Wales elections, which I argue people have every right to question. And if found that everything was above board, no problem. But the people have the right to question these things, and they are being discouraged from questioning anything. So this is exactly the purpose of this conversation, apart from really giving Stephen's story justice. I really want to ask the questions, Brett. So let's talk about the events of that tragic night. I understand that Stephen called you. What did he say took place before he rang you that night?
He stated to me that the police had appeared. He contacted me around 12 at night on a voice app that we had, and that was where myself and himself conversed on political matters and so forth. He was an advisor to me on political and constitutional issues. I ran as a federal as a candidate in the last federal election, so he was one of my advisors, and he contacted me, and at first I assumed it was a joke. I was basically going to bed. It's been a long day. I'm going to bed. I get a call coming through, and a terrified man comes on the line. And he said that, well, he stated to me, and I understand this is hearsay now, I didn't record the conversation. I didn't have the peace of mind to think about such a thing at the time. He stated to me he was terrified. Police were surrounding his house. He said that someone had obviously called them regarding him being sighted with a firearm. So he knew why the police were there, or what the supposed beginning of this situation was. He said someone has made a report, the police stating that they've made a report that I've been seen with a firearm. And he reiterated to me that it was a thing called a gel blaster, which are very realistic looking toys, basically. My son's got one. My son played with a gel blaster with Stephen in the backyard of his home. They shot little cans off a piece of wood with gel blasters. I've seen the gel blaster. I know what the device looks like. But they do look realistic. They do. They look like shotguns. They look like automatic rifles. Some look like pistols. They are legal here in Queensland to own, apparently. So, I mean, I certainly, if I thought they weren't, I wouldn't allow my son to have one. He's 11 years old.
Of course. So
I didn't regard him as a threat.
So this report, do we know who said that they saw Stephen with a gun?
Well, the police haven't said to me who it was. They, when the police spoke to me, and I've made a full statement to the police, they said that there was a report he was sighted with a firearm. That's their words to me. He was sighted with a firearm.
Anonymous, as far as we're aware.
As far as I understand, I mean, there's all sorts of accusations flying everywhere in a situation like this. You get that.
Of
but
course.
That's what the police stated to me. And I asked Stephen, I said, do you have a gun? Like a real one? And he said, I play with a gel blaster, which, as I said, I know. I've witnessed him playing with it. His neighbours have them, and everyone has the things. I know plenty of people who have the things.
So this is something that, I mean, you even said your son would play in Stephen's backyard with his gel blaster, with his own gel blaster. So it's not unusual for members of the community to play with these toys.
Look, someone contacted me yesterday and said, I just drove past someone's house and there was a gel blaster lying on the front step. And they said, isn't that something to be scared of now? So, I mean, I assumed they look like guns. So there's a gun lying on someone's front step. I didn't see a siege in Warwick last night over that report.
The interesting thing that I think we need to consider, Brett, is that following the tragedy that occurred in Weambla and the messaging from the Queensland Police Service, which, again, Zeee Media is a huge supporter of police in society, the role of police in society. We're supporters of police, but we are, like most Australians, expecting proper police practice, and certainly not a vilification of certain members in society. Now, the press releases that we've seen from the QPS talking about extremists and an act of terrorism and things of this nature, we need to ask the question, has this led members of the public to be unnecessarily afraid of certain people that perhaps have some questions about the government? Has it led to them being on high alert about individuals that we shouldn't be on high alert about? I mean, this is a genuine question that we need to be asking. And then consequently, has it led to the police overstepping or acting in a way that really isn't ethical? I mean, just in the past week alone, and I want to bring this up right now, we had a situation in Queensland. Just yesterday, the mainstream media reported about a fatal shooting of an Aboriginal man in Queensland, and that this was in far north Queensland. The community is saying the police took it too far. There was an escalation that was unnecessary. Then there's also the day before this tragic incident with Stephen, another person, found dead in his home after shots fired in the Townsville suburb of Kirwan. Now, all three incidents, including the tragic death of Stephen, have led to an ethical standards command, the ethical standards command being called in. That is 3 incidents in 1 week that have now requiring the ethical standards command to review these operations. So I wanted to ask you, Brett, because there are some other details regarding what transpired that night that really raise questions about police practice. You mentioned to me that that Stephen said that there was some sort of an acoustic device or a sonic device that was being used on the night. Can you tell us the details of that, please?
Well, as I was on a line to him, I heard the thing myself. Now, I am not an electronics expert. Have no knowledge of electronic warfare. I do not know any of that stuff. I state that right from the beginning. However, during the situation that happened, a shrill, high-pitched, ululating noise occurred, and it was repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated, like on a loop. At the same time, the police were calling with a loudspeaker. I also heard that through the through my phone, and I can only, as I said, I have no knowledge of the equipment, but I definitely know that that noise was like nothing I have ever heard before. It came through the phone. It nearly took my eardrums out. Now, I was not going, I will not abandon my friend. I don't care how it goes. I will not get off the line to him because some noise comes through a phone. It's affected me. I still have ringing in the ears from it. There were reports, and I know some of the journalists spoke to some neighbours, and they said that there was an awful noise. That I could hear people yelling in the background, and Stephen said to me, everyone's yelling out their windows at the police to shut it off. What it is, I don't know. Exactly what the device is, I don't know. But I do have some idea. As I went to Canberra with the anti-mandate protests approximately 12 months ago, and the police had a device that's called an LRAD, long-range acoustic device. Now, the device was deployed. The Federal Police Commissioner admitted that in a parliamentary inquiry, I believe a Senate inquiry. He admitted the device was deployed.
I'll say, Brett, that my understanding is that the admission was that it was used as a speaker, but not the actual long-range acoustic, I guess, weapon was deployed, but that it was used as a speaker. That was my understanding.
Well, that's the understanding that a lot of people have. I have someone forwarded to me what they claim is the only video of the device actually being used with an acoustic sound, and I have that video, and it is basically a short ping in the same noise that I heard through the phone, and I have that video.
I will also add. I'd love to see that, Brett, and I will also add that it cannot be denied that many protesters in Canberra, myself included, went home with injuries that were not sunburn. I was sent multiple photos in my Telegram channel of people with burns under their clothing, blisters under their clothing. So this was not from the sun. And we're talking about hundreds of people across Australia as a minimum. I saw hundreds reporting injuries following the protest at Canberra. So I'm not denying that there was a weapon of some sort used in Canberra. I just think that the official inquiry into whether that was an LRAD suggested that it may have even been something other than the LRAD that was used, a weapon used against protesters.
Yeah, as I say, I do not know electronic warfare. I've been a mechanic most of my life. I'm not a warfare expert. The fact is, people were injured in some way in Canberra. I know that for a fact. I was burnt. Friends of mine were burnt under their clothing, and I have photographs of that. My family were burnt. My family attended Canberra with it. Stephen himself was burnt. His face turned nearly purple because he wore his great-grandfather's World War I greatcoat and a hat to represent a historical element to the protest movement as to why it was basically against the Constitution in his idea. And he was burnt, and he knew. He spoke to me during the night. He said they're using some kind of weapon again.
Brett's story is truly shocking and should concern every single Australian. We'll be right back with the second half of this extraordinary interview after this short break and a quick word from one of our partners. Head to Survival Supplies Australia, a Zeee Media partner, today to prepare you and your household. They have the most comprehensive range in the country for all of your survival needs, including long life food, emergency 20-year life water, alternative power sources, and so much more. Head to the link in the description below to let them know you've come from Zeee Media.
He said he knew they were using something. Now, I don't understand. I sent Stephen's father around. I rang his father very early in the morning, approximately 1 o'clock or 12:30 or something. And I said, get around there. There's some situation. I live out of town. So I said, get around there, please. Your son is got trouble. He's in trouble. He needs help. The father went around there. The police said to the father, how did you know? And the father gave them my phone number. The police commander rang me, and he said to me, how did you know about this? And you're out of town. And I said, I have a communication with him. I'm on the line with him. And the police commander said to me, well, we heard nothing from him. We have no communications. Tell him to come out. Which I did. I relayed the message to Stephen. He was terrified. He said to me, I'm lying on the floor in my bedroom and praying. He was terrified. He believed he would die.
Why do you think that Stephen was so terrified?
Well, I would suggest a few reasons. One, he was a student of history, and history tells us well in all forms of how these situations seem to go. So that was a very intelligent man. So I would say he had a knowledge of that. He also was aware of having weapons like that device used. So he believed they were going to kill him. He believed he was going to die.
Did he say that? He said those words?
Yes, he said, they will kill me. I've put that in a police statement. Once again, it's hearsay, obviously. The conversation was between myself and him. I would seriously rather wish I wasn't involved in this situation, but unfortunately, I am. This guy was harmless. The police said he's posed no threat. He's made no threat. They said he's not communicated. He's made no threat. And I said to the commander, why are you using an acoustic device on him? Why is this situation being escalated? And the commander stated to me, and I've put this in the statement, we use this device, we use this to provoke a response, quote unquote, provoke a response. So how is, in my understanding of things, and I'm maybe not the smartest man in the world, how is escalating a situation to provoke a response? How is that coming to a peaceful solution with a man who's terrified?
Well, and certainly with a man that you think may be armed, you're not going to, I mean, let's say that they genuinely believe this man could be armed, which, you know, they did if they turned up with all of this gear. Wouldn't you have?
I can't say.
Well, okay. That I appreciate that rational thought. So, if he was, aren't you putting your own officers in danger, trying to provoke a response from a man who you believe is armed?
Well, I fail to understand how accelerating a situation or pouring petrol on the fire, if you want to use the term, is going to come to a successful conclusion. The idea is that the man, shows himself to police. The police requested to me, can you inform him to come to the door with his hands in full view, walk to the curb, which I did. I told Stephen that. I said, that's what the police are requesting, and I passed that message on faithfully. I said, it's from the police commander himself. I said, they inform me you will not be hurt. He was of a different opinion. He believed he would die. He believed he would be killed. He laid on the floor praying. He was terrified. I cannot, it'll stay with me the rest of my life. I was never trained to deal with a situation like this. Some people are. I was never. This will stay with me from the rest of my life. I spoke to a terrified, frightened man who believed he was going to die for hours.
I wonder, Brett, this device that people heard, and by the way, my understanding is that 7 News actually aired a report where the device could be heard in the background, pulled down the report, republished without that snippet. Is that correct?
I and many other people here, we got onto the 7 News site to see what the reports had been about this situation. And in the first couple of seconds of the report, there it was. You heard it. And not long after, the report came down and was, I'm told, republished without that.
Right. I myself, I can't verify that. I haven't seen it, but that's what I've read and heard about. Yeah. So, but regardless, whether there was a mainstream media report or not, many neighbors have testified to the fact that there was an incredibly loud sound that they could hear. And you know, as you mentioned, Stephen told you that neighbors were screaming for the police to turn this thing off. I wonder what sort of a sonic weapon this may have been, and whether that impairs people's ability to think clearly as well.
Well, I can only say the thing coming through a line to me, and if I got it second hand, it addled my thoughts. I couldn't think straight. My mental state has been up and down since this. Personally speaking, I'm finding it hard to put the words together to even describe what happened. Oh. I understand if a man is armed, if a man comes and threatens people with a firearm, use a SWAT team, take him out with a sniper. I agree with that. I have friends who are police, long-serving police. I don't want to see anyone endangered. I don't want to see people threatened, people have firearms used on them or anything like that. The entire reason that Stephen, myself and other people have been involved in this movement was to achieve a peaceful outcome. At no time have any of us threatened anybody. Yes, we look at online stories. Yes, I've looked at every story, from people who think that the Queen was a reptile to people who think that whatever, all sorts of things. It doesn't mean that I go out and prosecute some agenda of mine because of that. It means that you read what you're entitled to read. I have a book next to me that Stephen presented to my son at Christmas. Now, I'll show you the book. How to Write and Speak Better. I don't know whether I'd call that an extremist book. That was a gift to my son from Stephen, because Stephen didn't believe schools are educating them correctly. And I'm probably in agreement with some of that. So how is a person who studies and believes in law and believes in rule suddenly tortured into the point where if he had a gun, he's committed suicide? That's what the police are stating. He's used an old farm gun. That's the statement they made to me, an old farm gun to end his life. So, an old farm gun, I don't know. I never saw an old farm gun there, or shotguns or whatever, a shotgun apparently. So, but well, Brett, I saw Joe.
Can I ask you, so you're saying you never saw the weapon. Stephen told you that he didn't have a weapon. Had Stephen ever lied to you before?
To my knowledge, no. He could certainly argue, and I don't mean in a violent way, he could argue his point, and he would pretty much mostly win his point because, as I said, the man's intelligence was very high.
Right.
I trusted what he said.
So what happened after that? So you're saying that from my conversation with you, you offered to come and help mitigate the situation. The police refused to have you there helping. Was anyone else there offering their assistance?
Yes, his father. His father went around to the scene, introduced himself to police after I'd told his father that this was a situation. His father made his way there, introduced himself to police. His father was then sat in a police car. I said to Stephen, "Your father is outside," and he was upset. He said, I feel shame that my family is involved in this," and he loved his father dearly. And he, to my knowledge, his father never spoke to him. I wasn't there. I offered to the police. I said, "Look, I'll get in my car. I will come in town. I'll make any possible assistance that I can give to resolve this situation." I begged them to stop using lights in his windows and stop. I said, "This man is exhausted. He's tired. He's frightened. How can it possibly end?" I said, "Turn this stuff off. Let him have some peace." And I understand the police's point of view. There is a public safety risk. Obviously, a man with a firearm can be a very dangerous thing. However, the police stated he's made no threats, he's had no contact. We went there on a simple request about a man sighted with a gun. So how does it end up? How does it end up in this situation? That escalation beyond all my understanding. The death of a man at 4:30 in the morning. My contact with him ended with his last words to me being, "Tell everybody I love them." He said he's tired. He said, "Tell everybody I love them. God bless you." And I said, "God bless you, Stephen." The contact ended. I have no knowledge what happened after that. I can only understand what the police have told me, and his family the same. The police, that I cannot make any allegation or claim or anything after that, but I'm most certainly alleging that unnecessary escalation was used, and in my understanding, some form of torture was used on the man to provoke a response, in their words.
Well, I think you anyone would agree that listening to a weapon, a sonic weapon, if that's what we're calling it, for hours on end is torture for anyone, really, and certainly would impede someone's ability to think clearly. And as you're saying, he was very, very frightened, particularly having been injured at Canberra by what he believed to be some sort of a weapon, coming home with burns and things of this nature. Many people feel that way post Canberra, Brett. Many people are afraid of what the government and police can do post Canberra, having come home with burns. I mean, I had stories of people's children being asleep for hours every day after Canberra, their kids were in attendance and they were just sleeping for hours, persistent fatigue, other symptoms that just were too similar across the board, across every single state, that, you know, people from every state that went to Canberra to deny some sort of weapon, whatever it was, sonic weapon, radioactive weapon, not radioactive, my apologies, radio frequency. I think the fact that anyone would be afraid post that event, and I know many who are, is something that we need to consider here. You mentioned that
that in itself is psychological trauma with many people, thousands of people. It's psychological trauma.
I agree with you. So when your phone call ended with him, you said that Stephen said that at multiple points to you that he felt that he wouldn't make it through the night, that they were going to kill him.
He believed that.
And the official report is that Stephen, and I'm sorry to be graphic here, but that Stephen shot himself. Is that correct?
That is what the police informed me after I made a statement to police. I asked, "Can you let me know how he died?" And they said, their words were, and I quote, "He's used an old farm gun to end his life," unquote.
My understanding, Brett, and again, apologies for those viewing, and apologies to bring this up with you so close to the event, but that the police discouraged the family from looking at the body because they said because of the damage that Stephen allegedly did to himself. Is that correct?
My knowledge of that is that the nature of the injury precluded an early identification, and I'll leave that up to his family if they wish to comment. And I've spoken with them last night. I have contact with them. At this stage, they don't wish to state anything. There's a funeral on Wednesday for him. It's a very, very emotional event for them, and that these people are not used to that sort of thing happening. They're just normal, stable, calm people who live their life, and this comes as a shock to anybody.
We certainly want to be respectful of the family and their wishes, so I won't probe further in that regard. But I think it's just important that the public knows some of these details because we need to ensure that something like this never happens again. And as I mentioned early on in our conversation, Brett, we've had 3 separate incidents in the past week alone where the ethical standards command have been called in for the practices of Queensland Police. This is immediately following statements by the QPS that people who question the government could be domestic terrorists. I mean, it's undeniable. Their rhetoric is undeniable because we've all seen it in the mainstream media, and many people are, afraid of the police. And perhaps the police are afraid of the people, and we need to bridge that gap immediately, because the purpose of the police is to serve and protect the people, not to see them as an enemy or a threat.
Look, Maria, I'm not here to speak about myself, but I count on my personal list of friends approximately 11 people who ran for federal parliament in the last election. And I fail to understand how that makes us somehow domestic terrorists or anything. We believe in the rule of law. We believe in upholding the Australian Constitution. Do you think we would spend as group hundreds of thousands of dollars on election campaigns if we were out to overthrow the government by violent revolutions or anything? That's not what we're about. We're about upholding the law. And, you've got to go into people's psychology here a bit. Why would somebody who, in my case, I just want to finish my house and live a quiet life. Why would people uproot and suddenly start running for federal parliament?
I agree. We've seen many people gaining an interest in politics, gaining an interest in media, gaining an interest in getting involved in whatever way they can about a lot of things that they disagree with in our country. Prior to the COVID nonsense, many Australians weren't actively involved in politics, whereas now so many are. And so I think that is a marker of people that are concerned about the way that their country is heading. And again, we are very, very supportive of police, but when you look at the behaviour of the police over the past 3 years, and you look at the footage of police with shooting with rubber bullets at people, and you look at police officers body slamming a man at a train station in Victoria and then not being held accountable for that. It really does create a further divide between the people and the police. So the question is the government trying to further that divide, or are they trying to bridge it?
The only thing I can come out of this is it's every narrative needs an opposition to continue its existence. So, the opposition, in my personal belief, the opposition haven't done their job, as seen by the thrashing of the Liberals at the New South Wales election. So where is the effective opposition to the policies and practices put in place by government? That's why we get involved in politics. We love our country. We love our life. We're respectful, law-abiding people.
And Stephen was a respectful, law-abiding person also?
The man would probably have been King Charles's greatest supporter. He believed that these people were, that the royal family and that the monarchy, and I know a lot of people don't like the monarchy these days, but he believed that they were the basis of our law. And his history books certainly showed it. So our law has stood us in good stead for many years, but things have gone wrong. Something's desperately wrong, and it needs to be addressed. It needs to be talked about.
I agree with you, Brett. Can I ask you, do you think it would have been in Stephen's character to end his life?
I can't say. He was a deeply religious man. He believed that, as far as I understand, I had heard him speak on occasion that suicide was a unforgivable sin. I think he used the term. And so I find it hard to believe, but I cannot. I have no information otherwise. He stated to me during the night he was terrified, and he said at the end he was tired, maybe after, I'm only conjecturing, but after hours of what he went through, myself in that situation, I may wish for a quick end. That's all I can say.
Well, it's certainly, if that is sadly the way that Stephen went, To think that police pushed him to that, to something that he saw as an unforgivable sin, is beyond terrifying. And so whichever way you look at it, whether the official police report, which we haven't seen, and we're honest about that, whether the official police report, or what we know from what the police have said and told you is 100% the truth, the events that led to Stephen ending his life, if that's how he died, are absolutely unacceptable. And if it is completely out of character and it's not something that he would do because he was a religious man, what actually happened there? And to your knowledge, he didn't have an old farm gun. And I mean, there are so many questions that I have, which I understand you can't answer, and we'll continue to investigate from on our end, from Zeee Media's end, because we think it's important. We think it's important that something like this never happens again. We think that it's important that the Queensland Police don't see people as such a threat that they would torture them on end with an acoustic device or a sonic weapon. We think it's important to de-escalate. We think that 3 events in 1 week leading to the Ethical Standards Command investigating them is unacceptable. So the events of escalation by the police are on the rise, clearly, and it's leading to devastating outcomes for the community. And this is something that needs to be looked into. Brett, I'd like to hear your final words, or anything that you'd really love to tell people. Anything that maybe I haven't covered or I've gotten wrong.
Well, I'd like just to say in a closing that where have we come as a society when this forms of policing, and it comes from the top. I have no problem with individual police. They're just hardworking people doing a really difficult job. But where have we come as a society where situations end like this? Stephen was a kind man. He was probably the kindest man I ever knew. And I've known a lot of people. It should never have happened. And it must never happen again in this way. Things have to change. Things have to change. It can't be allowed to go on.
I absolutely agree with you, Brett, and we hope that us having this conversation with you and hearing the raw details from you, which again we so appreciate in this time that you've done this, in honor of your friend, we hope that this interview actually changes the course of this country's trajectory, changes the trajectory of the relationship between people and police. And not in we want it to change for the better, not in the way that it's going. Thank you so much, Brett, to you, and all the best wishes to you, your family, Stephen's family, and the whole community of Warwick.
Thank you, Maria.
We wanted to play this short documentary referenced in our interview, created by Brett's daughter while she was in school. She was a student of film and put together this short movie on Stephen during her schooling. We hope that this serves both as a tribute to Stephen Harrison and gives the viewers an insight into this gentle, wonderful man.
Well, my name's Stephen John James Fitzpatrick Harrison. Apologies for the handle, but it's Irish origin. And I'm a Bachelor of Arts double major in history from 2003 to 2006, both here and at the University of Queensland. I'm practically self-taught and self-teaching now, so anyone I find who's willing to allow me to chew their ear off, I do so. Well, I've been obsessed with it ever since I was a child, and I thought the obsession should lead the occupation. But no, I've always found it particularly fascinating, mainly, I suppose, out of how can I put it, comparing it to modern life. I found modern life less tasteful and old life more tasteful. Well, history is fundamentally like learning one's own surname or one's own origins. I mean, without history, it's impossible to have a real understanding of who one is, who one's country. The most curious thing was that an eccentric archipelago of tea drinkers ruled the world in such a way that no other civilization has ever succeeded in doing, even to the present day. I mean, America's vaunted superpower status is barely 1/5 of the power that we exercised over the planet less than 80 years ago. Basically, what one is viewing is something that is essentially miraculous. There's no reason why the Britain of the Stuarts became more powerful than the Kingdom of France, for example. Louis XIV's government in France was infinitely more powerful than ours. Likewise, Napoleon was thrashing the Russian Empire, which had about 10 times our strength, And even then, after 20 years, as Napoleon grudgingly admitted, it was St George's cavalry that beat him. And when he was referring to St George's cavalry, he was referring to St George on the British gold sovereign, as there was a common saying at the time that Britain would fight to the very last Austrian. I find that our ancestors lived in a way that was in more accordance with nature and with humanity's inherent desire for beauty than we do today. I find that there is a pandemic of uglification, to quote His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, in the modern world. That anything beautiful we find, we seem to get our paws upon it and turn it into something ugly and detestable. When it comes down to basic levels of history, at the moment we have an attitude in historical academia that argues that history should be interpreted according to political ideology, whereas history really at all times should be governed by primary evidence. Trying to read a philosophy into that is only of any value if the facts actually dictate that philosophy. But if the philosophy dictates the acceptance of the facts, it becomes propaganda. Because it gets to a point where it's impossible to put everything into topics when one sees the holistic picture, like I was referring to earlier, with a beginning and an end. Instead, one sees an entire grand narrative, and every part of that is linked. And thus you learn about one part, you inevitably learn about another part, which fans into another part, which fans into another part. And it gives you plenty of nervous breakdowns, but it's lots of fun. Never trust a book published in the British Empire after the 1930s unless you can vet all of its evidence. But preferably the older the better. You know, if you get into history books written especially in the early 19th century, you'll find the highest quality of all. And also with regards to any form of primary source. If you find any kind of primary source from any period, whether it be letters, coins, artefacts from that period, diaries, cross-references for ambassadors and courts and things like that.
Brett shared with us that many people in the town of Warwick were fearful of what the police may do to them next. We think this state of fear is a completely unacceptable and alarming state for innocent people to be in. No one should be afraid of the police if they have done nothing wrong. What made the officers in this small town, a highly tightly knit community, turn so violently on this man who posed no threat to anyone and was loved by the community? We assume that most police at the scene would have known this to be true. What has prompted police to engage in this regular and on the rise, very American-style shoot from the hip, heavy-armed SWAT team response that we have never seen before in this country? We're also seeing the rise of the use of these ear-piercing sonic weapons, first seen at the Canberra protest in Australia and now being used against single civilians to provoke a response. This is beyond deplorable behaviour by law enforcement, and it needs to end immediately. Is the language of the Queensland Police Commissioner telling you that innocent people with questions may be domestic terrorists and potential cop killers, leading you to respond in this heavy-handed manner? Has the Queensland Police Commissioner successfully scared you into thinking peaceful members of the public are your enemy? We understand and acknowledge that police are an integral part of modern society. Without law and order, we essentially have anarchy, and no one wants that. But this change in tact by Australian law enforcement at all levels must be addressed, starting from within. As important as is police conduct, of equal importance is those who are legislating or driving this change in policing and in police culture. Ask yourselves, is this really in the best interests of the very people you swore to protect? The government and the mainstream media have painted regular people who have questions that require an answer about the direction our country is heading in as guilty until proven innocent. And this thinking seems to have infected the minds of everyone, and police are not immune. We would like to see a return to the policing of old, where we, the people, would walk down the street and greet you and thank you for your service. We would like to interact with you not through fear, but through respect. Not as our predators, but as our protectors. We implore all members of Australian law enforcement to look within, to do what's right, to question some of the tactics used, and whether they are an equal response to this so-called threat of regular Australians. People who just want to live their lives. And ask yourselves, if we keep going this way, where will we end up? We thank everyone for watching tonight. We encourage all viewers to follow Zeee Media on our social platforms, including Telegram being our main platform, Zeee Media. Instagram, you can find me there on maria.zeee, 3 E's. Facebook, highly shadow banned, but we are there. Zeee Media on YouTube, Maria Z on Rumble, and many, many others. And of course, you can always find our content on zeemedia.com. We thank you all for watching tonight. We encourage viewers to share this with everyone for the sake of Stephen Harrison and for all Australian people. We'll see you next Wednesday at 8 p.m. right here on Zero Time. Good night and God bless. Zeee Media is the leader in independent media in Australia. Head to zeemedia.com and the interviews page for all of my latest interviews with experts from across the world, contributions on the Stu Peters Show, and weekly Zero Time broadcasts. You'll also find another videos page on there where you can stay informed about what's happening around the world. In the merch section, men's tees, women's tees, long sleeve tees, unisex hoodies, and kids merch. You can support us on the support page and also head to our affiliates page to support the businesses that choose to partner with us.